This is Adam Simbeye with This Week in Perspective. At the last African Continental Free Trade Area, operational strategies have been endorsed by the 55-strong nation trading bloc. And if successful, it would unite 1.3 billion people, creating over US dollars 3.4 trillion of the economic bloc that will usher in a new era of development in Africa. It is also described as the largest trading bloc since the creation of the World Trade Organization in 1994, and obviously responds to some people's argument to the African Economic Community as considered or as propounded, envisioned in the Abuja Treaty of 1991. The operational modalities was the agenda and discussed by the extraordinary AU summit of the heads of state and government in Niamey, Niger on the 7th of this month. Whilst Tanzania, one of the few countries which have not yet or as yet signed the Continental Free Trade Area, the government stated recently that internal consultations and talks are still being held before signing the agreement. To discuss this apparently important and new Africa trading bloc, with me today are, on my right, Dr. Brevius Kahyoza, who is an economic and social analyst. I think he's also teaching, I might be wrong, right? Still teaching at Kampala International University, a regular participant. Next is Professor Francis Matambalia, formerly University of Dar es Salaam. He's now with Mwalimu Nyerere Foundation as director. On my left is a prominent businessman. I mean, a founder member of this program, but we have missed him for a while because he's a very busy man. Is Engineer Ali Mufrok, who is chairman and chief executive of Infotech Investment Group. Last but not least, another regular participant is Ambassador Doctor or Dr. Ambassador Suya Mangachi, a former ambassador and now part-time teaching to the Department of Political Science and Administration, University of Dar es Salaam. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope we'll not really tear to pieces, but you not cut each other's throats here. I'm here to control that because it's a very interesting and sensitive topic, but you will actually take the opportunity to educate Tanzanians about this Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. You may answer the question, for example, why aren't we in? But of course the government has responded to that, and we'll ask, shall we join them soon, or how soon shall we? But almost all the countries, including the biggest and probably the wealthiest country, Nigeria, joined in at the last meeting in Niamey, Niger. So welcome to the program again. I'll start with you, Engineer Ali Mufrok, and we are privileged that you actually attended and addressed the heads of state on this topic. So it's a bonus for us and for the discussion. Let me start with you. For the benefit of the viewers, could you describe what is the African Continental Free Trade Area, please?
The Africa Continental Free Trade Area, the way I understand it, is a trading framework that brings together 50, or aims to bring together all the 55 African countries on this continent into a single trading zone where, for purposes of trade, there will be technically no borders, no tariffs. That is the long-term goal of this, and there will be free movement of people, goods and services, and the whole idea is to enable Africa to respond to the global challenge that we face today in trade, in the sense that countries have been getting together over the last 70 years now, since the European Union or European Community evolved into the European Union. Countries have been getting together to form trading blocs that are capable of withstanding the trade forces of their competitors. So we have recognized, I guess our leaders did back in 1991, that individual African countries cannot withstand the competition of global trade by themselves. They need to get together initially in regional economic integration zones, but now ultimately in an Africa-wide kind of trading community in order to be able to trade profitably, to trade in a manner that benefits them, as opposed to trading in a manner that has perpetually impoverished Africa, which is that is the whole purpose of this CFTA. It's no different from the EAC, for example, that we are all familiar with.
You mean
it's
the
just
regional
that it's
economic
Pan-African.
group is,
Yeah.
It's no different from the regional economic
No,
group.
it isn't. It's
Like
just
ECOWAS,
Pan-African
yeah,
now. Yeah.
SADC.
Yeah.
Okay. What new will the Continental Free Trade Area bring about, which is different from the regional economic integration groupings that we would have? You cited the East African Community. I mean, we are trying the East African Community to open up. The treaty does refer to opening up the borders, free movement of people, which we haven't moved in very much in that area. So how will this be?
No, we have moved. You have to give credit to the EAC, particularly one of the most admired regional trading economic integration bloc in the whole of Africa. That intra-regional trade has grown at least until 2013 from just a couple of tens of hundreds of millions of dollars to, I think, somewhere in the region of 5 billion by 2013, although in recent years it seems to have declined according to statistics that were released by ECA recently. But we have now freer movement of people, freer movement of goods across the borders of East Africa. Some countries can access each other's borders using national identity cards. We have an East African passport. We have visa-free entry across all these countries, but also a residence permit exemption for some countries to others within the EAC. So there has been quite a big improvement. We have harmonized quite a lot of our standards of goods that are manufactured in industries. We have mutual recognition of regulatory frameworks that has enabled businesses to trade across borders with less constraints and at lower costs. We have, I think, now engagements going on about a potential common currency. There has been progress, and in 20 years I think we have achieved quite something, although a lot of people think we could have done much more. But the EAC serves as an example of what is possible if we can expand this to cover the entire continent. We go into this with experience of how it's done, but also with the experience of the challenges that we are going to face as we try to integrate the continent. Because we have faced quite a number of difficulties over the last 20 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Professor Matambale,
Yes.
do you think, or do you share the view that the Africa Continental Free Trade Area zone, as it were, is going to be the largest trading bloc in the world? I mean, other than the World Trading Organization created in 1994. Do you think so?
Well, the answer is yes and no, because when we talk about what is largest, if we're talking about the number of countries involved in this trading bloc, yes, we are going to be the largest. And if you talk about the area covered by the countries involved in this, so the geographical area covered by this, how many square kilometers? Of course, this is a whole continent, is more than 30 million square kilometers. Again, is going to be the largest. But in terms of...
That's the no now. You're coming to the no now.
The no is, in terms of economic significance, Africa still has a very small share of the global economy. If you take the global GDP, Africa's share is around 2.2%.
And yet it's the largest in terms of population.
Yeah, so
No, not really
in terms
much.
of population, we are hovering
16%.
16, approaching 17%, which
Yeah.
is quite big.
But
because we
slightly
are-
smaller than India and China.
well, around that number. But so you cannot talk about the largest. For instance, when we talk in terms of our share in the global economy, how much we can produce and how much we can trade is also reflected in that, because our shares of global trade, they also hover around those percentages, 3 to 4%, sometimes less than that. So the answer I would say is yes and no.
No, yes.
Yeah.
Ambassador Dr. Mangachi, if a number of countries which belong to the AU have already joined, many of them have ratified the agreement, Tanzania, the biggest country, or the largest country in East Africa economic grouping, has not ratified, although it has been involved in all the processes of the Africa Congress. Would you suggest to say the reasons you think why?
So far, according to statistics, I think only 27 countries have ratified.
Yes.
But,
Because that was the threshold.
No,
But
the threshold
22.
was 22.
Yes.
The threshold was 22. So far, 27. And Tanzania is among many countries which have not ratified yet. And there's time, I think, to study the significance of this and, give ourselves time not to rush into it. And why do we say this? Because there's nothing really very new in the so-called African Continental Free Trade Area.
Nothing new?
Nothing new, because the concept comes from the Abuja Treaty.
Yeah.
And the Abuja Treaty envisioned an African economic community, and it spelled out the stages on how it should be achieved.
Mm-hmm.
And the main stages were the free trade area, which is the basis for the African
Yes.
Continental Free Trade Area.
Yes.
It's the beginning of that process.
Yes.
But it should be done on a regional basis, that is creation of regional economic communities,
Which most
which
of them
were
have been-
created,
which most of them
and
have
they
been
all
created.
began with that. But in order to have the area of nitty-gritty integration,
Yes.
countries were encouraged, or regional economic communities were encouraged to establish customs unions. This is the entry point, in the studies of regional integration. The entry point for critical integration is customs union. Why? Because the countries are taking decisions to reduce their tariffs to zero, so that goods and services can flow to each other's territory
Within the continent.
within the continent without tariffs. But of course, they don't start there. But this is the objective. They can start with 90%, 80%, but to reduce it to zero. And this is the significance
sorry.
of customs union.
Yes. Has this happened?
Now,
Small or
it
otherwise?
didn't happen, and that's why we are saying, the attempt to create this African Continental Free Trade Area
Yes.
is a way of circumventing a failure.
Not trying to do something bigger.
Not trying to
Because
do something
we're-
new.
we're too behind.
Not trying to do something new, because only among the 7 recognized regional economic communities of the AU,
Yes.
only the East African Community has a functional customs union. And I'm using the word
Yes.
functional,
Yes.
I think, carefully here.
Not ECOWAS?
No, ECOWAS has some aspects of it, but
SADC?
no. SADC, no. SADC is a free trade area. so they are saying this. Since we have not been able to reach the stage of establishing a customs union.
Yes.
And I think I should articulate one more aspect of a customs union, why it is significant. Because it's a kind of a protectionist measure which has been allowed by the WTO for particularly developing countries.
That's the World Trade
To
Organization.
cushion them, to cushion them from the challenges of globalization, which require reciprocity, you know. But they say if countries can establish these regional economic blocks
Yes.
or communities and establish a customs union,
Yes.
they would be permitted not only to establish a customs union among the member states,
Yes.
but to exercise what is called a common external tariff, a common external tariff
Yep.
for goods that are coming into that customs union area.
Yeah.
That is, you can tax at a higher level
Yes.
the goods that are coming to your customs union area.
Even
In
if,
order-
if these goods, excuse me, even if these goods are produced within the same region,
No, we're talking about importing
from outside.
from
the region.
outside coming to a customs union area.
Yes.
You know, these ones are to be taxed in order to protect the countries that are in the customs union, to protect those goods, you know, from competition. And it's
At the
something.
same time, protect their slowly emerging industries. as it
It's
were.
slowly emerging industries, and this is the whole idea of it. Now, since we didn't reach there, I think the logic has been that okay, it started with the tripartite regional economic communities, SADC, East African Community, and COMESA. This idea of a continental
Yes.
free trade area started with these three
Okay.
in 2008, and they said, why do we have different administrations for regimes for overseeing a free trade area in three regional economic communities? Why don't we have just one framework under which we can agree
Yes.
for goods to move around with us? And
Okay.
African Union said this was a very good idea.
And they
Why
picked it
don't
up.
you have it on a continental level?
Sure.
You know,
That's
because
what we
all
have
the
it now.
regs in the continent on a continental level are at the level of free trade area. Why
Okay.
don't you bring them together?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Young economist, Dr. Brevius Karios. You had the three eminent and professional experienced individuals here. Very strong views, plus the ambassador here, who says, you heard him, Africa continental free trade area maybe has come either too early, or should it have come until we do one or two things? Would you share that view? Or what is your view?
Thank you, Mr. Simbe. With due respect, I do disagree with what Alozi Mangachi is saying in terms of that there is nothing new what has happened. I've taken time to read the 50-something document of the Africa Free Trade Area agreement of sort. I think there are fundamental issues which are lofty in terms of what we can do at the moment. I think there is a lot that is different if you are to go by the history. Number two, I think what is contentious here is not the practical side of the thing. If you hear what my senior panelists have talked about, it's all about the practicalities of business. And I remember when I was a second year student, one of my econometrics lecturer told us, you know, economists are made to think, and business people are made to do their practicalities of what economists think. And I think this whole discussion, and I've followed all over in Twitter, Facebook, in different countries, I've got groups. It's like people are talking much more about the practicalities. And I don't think it's a bad thing, but again, it can't give us what we want to do. The other thing I would like to say is, to me, as I have said, it's a monumental step towards the Africa integration. And you can look at it in the following perspective. Number one, it's very clear that it is true that Africa has crossed now what I would call the Rubicon. You remember Julius Caesar crossing to, it was not expected to move to the other side with your soldiers, with your, everything. And then once he crossed there with all of his troops, then it was a declaration of war. And I think if you look at those who are skeptical about this thing, they are not taking into consideration the global aspects of business. I think the global aspects of trade. And the matter is this. For the past 40 years, the argument has been, if you globalize your economy on one side and liberalize politics on the other, you will create a sort of your own paradise. Now, in some instances, that has been the case, but we have seen, I think, for the past 5 years, it has faced a backlash. People are saying, no, we don't want the thing. Globalization is killing everything. So we want to lock ourselves in our own enclaves, of course, these boundaries. And this is eating up many of the economies. If you look at the problems that are facing Africa today, and I shared with my new coming book, which I shared with you last 2 weeks, where I've written about the organizational, political, economic development and international governance. Now, if you don't get away of this shell, it's clear that will be, I think, it will be dead on arrival if we start doing what I'm seeing.
Would you say it's a non-starter?
It isn't a non-starter. And think that way will be, I think, creating the same problem we've been grappling with for the past many years. Number three.
Before we go to number three, what then is fundamentally the best way to address this if it's a non-starter?
I think we have to look at, I've said about the practical side, that's a very good thing, but the philosophical side I think is very important in this historical perspective, and I'd like to shed light on this. Before getting this discussion, Dr. Mangachi gave us some sort of the historical background of the Adam Smith and
kind
so
of
forth.
food to eat.
And I would like to debunk that. When Adam Smith was writing the creation of
The Wealth of
the Nation, I think that's 1776.
Yeah.
The gap between the richest country and the poorest country was almost 4 times. 2 or 3 years later, today, the gap is 250 times higher. So if you take the smallest country in terms of its economy, you find that it is 250 times lower than the richest country. And this has been one of the reasons, the productive capacity of such countries. Not because of the resources you're having, because the argument is we try to protect our resources. And this is replicated, for example, in the US economy. For example, for the past 100 years, the production has increased 30 times in the US economy, not because of the resources they're having, but because of innovation that has come with interaction, the liberal ideas, and quote unquote. So people, when they talk about the liberal ideas, people think about socialism or capitalism. That's what I mean. So it has made, I think, important progress in terms of unleashing these people from, the state of the precarious conditions they are in. So if you want to get the whole picture of the thing, I think the practical side is good, as they are saying, but I think the philosophical one is very, very important. We have to come to the fact that if we keep on arguing the same way we have been arguing, it's like saying, okay, we still believe that China, the United States, the United Kingdom are still the Santa Claus of Africa. It's no more the case. We have to take bold actions and do what is required. The last point before I kick this ball to the rest, if you have to look at the numbers, and
which numbers now?
I'll go on some of the numbers. Number one is the trajectory of our economy.
In Africa?
In Africa. If you look, for example, at the agricultural sector,
yes,
I think is more experienced than us. 56% to 67% of the manufacturing are agro-based. If you talk about manufacturing in this continent. And the way Africa is spending almost 35 billion to 43 billion US dollars a year on importing food. if you go into the econometrical analysis of what is like being in that situation, that it is costing more Africa and creating more the hoi polloi than any other continent, because the intra-export trade within Africa in terms of that would have, broken these chains to the African economy. If you look at the way you talked about the number of people, when you ask is going to be the biggest block, we'll be having 1.7 billion people 2030 or so, and the consumer confidence and consumer spending, if you get them together, it will be a content of about 6.7 trillion. And now, if you look at the rest of the content, talked about the counter reaction from other continents. For example, Europe, when we talk about today, the intra-trade, we talk about the percentages, or 67%, 60%, or 79%. 69% or 70% of the intra-trade. But if you quantify that into real terms, it is about 8 trillion euro a year. And now that, if you have to go, for example, in the agricultural sector, in terms of their internal trade, because they have allowed these free movements and so on, it is more than what we make for 5 years in Africa in terms of poverty reduction from that aspect. But one of the reasons that they have allowed themselves to go out of their ways.
Okay.
I understand there are challenges.
Yes.
However, that will have to be keen, I think, in terms of what you do. I've read, for example, the editorial in the Spiegel, immediately to finish that meeting.
The meeting in Niger.
I've heard of the big shots of
Europe.
the world economy, or what they're viewing about it, and the one went ahead and saying, if we can't scrap this thing called the agricultural policy of Europe, Africa will not get out of its way to eradicate poverty. And then if it has to remain as it is, some are viewing it as a tool to keep on blocking Africa from development. Despite that, they have given $43 or $45 billion in terms of capacity building.
All right. Well, that's interesting. Can I come to you, Engineer Ali Mufruk? You sense the feelings, maybe the thinking, the mood in Niger, Niamey, during the extraordinary summit, where, of course, the Tanzania was represented by the Vice President, Madam Samia Suluhu Hassan, and you. Tell the viewers very quickly in simple terms, all said about the continental free trade area and the for, the against, and all that. Do you think it will have any benefits for Africa? And if we narrow it down to Tanzania, what will Tanzania benefit by kind of joining, being a member, founder of East African Community, which the ambassador says most of the things are there, and we have a common market, a common tariff, whatever, by joining or signing into the Africa Continental Free Trade Area?
First, the mood. I mean, the most defining moment of that day on the 7th of July this year in Niamey was the moment when President Buhari, in front of his colleagues and the world, signed the treaty on behalf of his country, followed by the President of Benin, bringing the number of countries that have now signed to 54 out of 55, with Eritrea being the only holdout. So it was a celebratory mood because people were concerned. After all, Nigeria represents quite a big chunk of the African GDP.
Yes.
So if Nigeria were to remain out of the treaty, it would create doubts amongst a lot of people, both within the African continent and outside the continent. So it was very good for them to do that, and for them to do that on the day that the CFTA was formally coming into force, launched by these head states who were present there. But the other thing about whether this is going to benefit us or not I think we should not forget the context, where we are today, okay? And where we want to go a generation from now, as a country, but also as a continent. When the Abuja Treaty or the Lagos Plan of Action, I don't remember which years it was done, but somewhere in the 90s.
In 80.
Yeah, in the 80s. I don't know if you remember what the population of the continent was. It was less than half of what it is today. And in terms of demographics, it was not as skewed towards the youth as it is today. Okay?
Yes.
Today, we are 1.3 billion people. Almost 80% of which are below the age of 35. The majority of which, between the age of 18 and 35, not only are they unemployed, but are also unemployable.
And impoverished.
Because they did not receive the education they were supposed to get. We are living in a time when the few who are educated
Yes.
and are unable to find work are undertaking very risky treks across the desert to go to Europe on rickety boats to find greener pastures there. Quite a lot of people who have been found dead in the Mediterranean were found to have university degrees on them. We have African university graduates delivering themselves into modern day slavery because of lack of opportunity on this continent. So this is the urgency with which we need to look at this situation.
And do you think the African Continental Free Trade Area will offer this?
No, I'll tell you, we have to look at the problem we are trying to fix.
Yes.
The problem we are trying to fix is the problem of jobs for the hundreds of millions of young people that we have.
Yes.
Almost 25 million young people are entering the job market in sub-Saharan Africa alone every single year.
Yes.
In sub-Saharan Africa, every single year is not able to create more than 500,000 jobs. So people have looked around and come to the conclusion that unless we industrialize on a mega scale, we are never going to be able to create the jobs that we need to create, just to keep these young people productive and busy.
Okay.
Okay? But also to grow the wealth of our countries, because you cannot grow the wealth of your country if all you do is export raw materials and import finished goods from other economies. So we don't have a choice but to industrialize. Now the question is, if you industrialize, where are you going to sell your goods? If you are industrialized, are you going to sell your goods to America? Are you going to sell your goods to China? Are you going to sell your goods to Europe? Or are you first going to sell your goods to other African countries? Where is the market? Again, economists have established the only market in the world, the only area in the world that still has a sizable scope for consumption growth is a place called Africa. Every other part of the world is either saturated in terms of consumption or is nearing saturation. If you go to Europe, people have 2 cars, 2 phones, house, they have pensions, they have everything, they have all the groceries they can buy,
and life is
all
easier.
the clothes they can wear, and they have almost 100% employment.
Yes.
The only place where there is significant scope for growth is Africa. Now the problem is, it exists, but it doesn't mean that we are able to seize it. A lot of people are looking at Africa and scheming and planning on how to take up that opportunity, how to take up Africa's consumption. The $43 billion that we use to import food into Africa, there are people who benefit from it.
Not necessarily African.
No, they are not Africans. And they are not going to want to let go of that. So now when I talk to my African colleagues who are so skeptical about the CFTA, say if we open up, Tanzania is going to be dominated by Kenya, Tanzania is going to be dominated by Egypt. But our entire history as African has been a history of domination by others.
When are we going to change that?
Our shops are full of Chinese goods. Our shops are full of European goods.
Yes.
Now, are those better? I would rather buy Kenyan goods. I'd rather buy Egyptian goods than continue this colonial mode of consumption. So that's why not only do we have to industrialize, because we don't have a choice. We cannot continue being pastoralists and agricultural people who produce raw material goods, raw goods, and export them abroad.
By subsistence farming.
Because, as you can see, our young people don't want to farm.
Yes.
And it's very tough to farm. It's very tough to face a forest, a virgin forest with a hoe and a panga. It's very tough. Nobody wants to do that. So we have to industrialize. And when we industrialize, we have to train people. We have to employ people. We have to keep people busy in a productive way. But we have to have markets. Okay. Tanzania cannot have industries that manufacture only for local consumption. We have to be able to access Kenyan markets, Ugandan markets, Zambian markets, Congolese markets. Where is the trading framework? Okay. The trading framework is the Continental Free Trade Area.
Okay. Tanzania, under President Fifth Phase administration, the motto is to industrialize Tanzania and make it a middle-income country by 2025. Is it 2020? 2025. 2020 is too short. Now, and that's why I suppose we have resisted signing the economic partnership agreement with the European Union, where Kenya and the others, Rwanda, have signed. Now, the fear is to protect our industries, which for now we don't have much, but we wanted to industrialize. So, if we industrialize, produce, what are we going to produce?
I don't mind, actually, although I think they may be doing it for the wrong reasons, but I am one of those who are supporting that we should defer the signing of the EPA until we are in a position to negotiate with the Europeans from a position of strength. Yep. And we are not going to be in a position to negotiate from a position of strength as Tanzania alone. But as Africa, yes, with our 3-point-something trillion GDP, yes, we can negotiate something with the Europeans.
Yes.
So the CFTA would be the best platform to negotiate with the Europeans for the EPAs.
But the EPA...
Eventually, we are going to get there. No, I mean, I know some countries have signed. I know some countries have moved ahead on this. Yes. But there can always be reviews. And I think the CFTA is going to require that all countries take another look at the bilateral agreements they signed in order to be able to comply with the CFTA.
Okay.
So I think that the EPA I have issues with, but I really think we need to get onto this program on the CFTA, because Tanzania, with its 50 billion GDP,
yes,
you know, 50 billion GDP, you know what's the size of that? It's a very tiny GDP.
Absolutely.
It's a very tiny GDP.
Comparable to other countries, I suppose.
No, to some companies. Mid-sized American companies are bigger than $50 billion. so just one company, owned by a few individuals.
Yes.
So I think that we need to be pragmatic. It's only unity in strength that is going to move us into the future with a chance of survival.
Excellent, Mr. Engineer Mufroki. Now, as you are explaining and raising issues, I could see on my left Ambassador Dr. Mangachi was
nodding
and smiling at the same time. Now, I don't know whether that's an indication that he was agreeing with you or he has issues with that, but can you very quickly say, before I ask Professor Mtambalya one or two questions?
I think for once, Dr. Mufroki has...
Engineer Mufroki.
Engineer Mufroki has really hit the nail on its head.
Oh, now you agree. Eh?
Now we agree that we have an opportunity under this African Continental Free Trade Area.
Yes.
If we have the goods and services, because it is about selling goods and services, exchanging goods and services.
And selling to who?
To each other. Mm-hmm. And that Tanzania does not have these goods and services. We have raw materials. And that we have to embark on a program, serious program. This framework of industrialization is the right step to move into the direction of transforming our raw materials into goods and services that are required to to participate in the opportunity that is being created for this. Now, if we are talking this, I think we are talking sense, not just opening up and you have nothing to take to the market. Tanzania is an industrial country. I mean, is an agricultural country, least developed country, and we want to join a club of trading nations. And we have a lot of work to do.
Absolutely.
Industrialization. Yes.
Thank you. Professor Matambalya, I don't know, do you think Africa Continental Free Trade Area will succeed eventually? In the way it is envisaged, and in the way Dr. Engineer Ali Mufruk has described the benefits and where Africa is and the need to open up our market, but we have to have goods to sell in those markets. Yeah. And of course, Ambassador says, if we don't produce anything, what are we going to sell to each other? Now,
let me say that
Dr. Hauser was saying earlier that maybe it is a non-starter. Do you think it will succeed?
Let me start by saying that failing is not an option. It must succeed.
Yes.
In the short or long term, it must succeed.
Yes.
Now, also before making a few clarifications, probably we try to put things in context for the benefit of the viewers. International trade is important, but probably it's important also to remind our people that the most important trade is domestic trade. Because for every major economy in the world, they don't export more than 10% of what they produce.
Where does the rest go?
They consume locally.
Consumed locally.
Yeah, if you take the major economies, United States, or you take
China.
China, I don't have the figures, but take Japan. I haven't studied China so much, but United States, Japan, or the Germans, the European Union.
Or the British.
Yeah, that's why 90% is usually consumed locally. That is an indication of a healthy economy. So essentially, yes, we do international trade, but basically we produce for the domestic market, and we shouldn't, in a globalized, in a world where we interact with each other, we cannot do without international trade. But it's important to bear in mind that we produce basically for the domestic market, despite a lot of hype on international trade.
But Professor, right there, don't you need to have an economic base or a population which is able to consume? But if you produce goods which your own people cannot buy or cannot actually access them, what do you do with that? You have to uplift these people first, so that they become more consumable, so that they can access these products. Which means you have to create worth. Which one goes first? I hope it's not the question of the chicken and egg. Produce for domestic consumption. Forget for a while about trading outside.
But they're able to buy goods from elsewhere.
Let me clarify, because you cut me short. I was still explaining. Producing for the domestic market doesn't mean you don't produce for the international market, for foreign markets as well. I was just trying to remind that often cases, if you look at the debate, you'll think that without international trade, we are going to all die.
Which is not.
Which is not. It's not the case. This is how the statistics tell us. We know international trade is important because we have an opportunity to exchange goods and services which are needed all over the world. But domestic trade is critical, and that's why you see, if you look at the statistics of every major economy, this is what is going to tell you. Now, why is the African continental free trade area going to be a success? It will succeed, but it's not going to succeed if we don't put in place the framework conditions for it to succeed. I mean, to be successful. The point here is the following. Trade is a very end of this value chain. You must start by investing intelligently, produce, and then what you produce, you trade.
And,
Now,
and you
so-
produce of quality products. I
Yes.
mean, so that you can compete, isn't that so?
Precisely. And the point here is that competitiveness in international trade, even in your own domestic market,
Yes.
depends very much on how you invest, in which sectors you invest, and what you produce, and how you diversify your production.
Yes.
So if you don't have competitiveness in investments, then you are not going to have competitiveness in production because you are investing wrongly, putting your money in the wrong sectors, and then you will not be able to participate in international trade successfully. Why? Because if you look at, for instance, international merchandise trade, 70% of that is in industry, in manufactured goods. And every major region in the world, if you look at the biggest share of the international trade is in industrial and in manufactured products, with the single exception of Africa.
Yes.
Africa's largest component of our export are fuels.
Yeah.
We're an exception from the rest of the world.
Oh, God forbid.
So what is
Yes.
the problem? Let me finish. The point here is that if you don't have in place the framework conditions, you are not going to be able to produce competitively, even if you try to.
including
You see?
infrastructure.
So now, what are the framework conditions is probably one of the points we should clarify. We need financial resource capacities. What is lacking in Africa, for instance? Industrial finance is not there. Agricultural finance is not there. So in short, development finance is not there. But equally important, we need other capacities. We must have entrepreneurial capacities. Where are they? We need expertise. These are knowledge and skills capacities.
Yes.
Where are they? We need infrastructure. We are doing something on that. We need
Telecommunication.
we need technological capacities. Where are they? Africa is not a producer of technologies, for instance, and we don't see very clear efforts to develop this continent's technologies. We need institutional capacities. Organizations are important.
Yes. Now,
Then-
let me cut you short there
Yeah.
because we're warned the time is against us.
Yeah.
Before I come to you very quickly, we will exceed a few minutes today, but they'll bear with me. You were referring to investment. Now, locally, investments like Ali Mufruki are very few and far apart.
Yeah.
And we keep on asking investors, wherever you go here, people talking, well, Fadhili, why do I invest? But who from outside the country will come to invest in Tanzania for you to produce goods which will kind of stop you from importing goods? If not Ali Mufruki and his colleagues, because he's a Tanzanian, the country is first for him, and he wants to invest in the country. But how many are they?
Well, they are.
We need to really get rid of this fantasy. The fantasy that from day one,
Yes.
we are going to be, a country with its own industrialists, with its own industries, and ready to compete with the world.
Yes.
Tanzania's industrial capacity is going to be built incrementally over time.
Yes.
And what is required beyond finance is something that is going to take a long time and a hard work to build, which is human capabilities.
Yes.
This takes time to build.
Yes.
Okay? So let us not fantasize. Let us not use theory. Let's look at practical examples of what has happened elsewhere. How did China build its economy? How did Malaysia build its economy? How did Vietnam build its economy most recently? How did Turkey build its economy? We know the stages through which they went. Okay? First of all, you have to attract foreign direct investment.
Absolutely.
The investment comes with money, it comes with managerial skills, it comes with technologies that you do not have. Okay? But look at how CFTA is going to help you do that. When you attract FDI into your country by creating conditions that are going to be to make it easy for FDIs to flow, people will come to situate themselves here, manufacture, to export to other African markets.
So you use the
In the
FTA
meantime,
in Africa
we use the
to
FDIs,
produce.
first of all, to develop skills, to know how to manage industries, how to run industries, how to own industries, how to build them.
Yes.
It takes time. So you have to look at Tanzania 30 years from now and try to imagine a successful CFTA implementation. We are going to be there. Don't worry about the fact that there are very few of us today.
Yes.
Huh?
Yes.
Just look at the future and see what will it take for us to build a future that we want.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Very quickly before I start going around with the last question, before you come in, I know you have a lot and time is against us. As an economist, oh dear, where did it go? Come back, you fellow. I read somewhere where it says Africa Continental Free Trade Area is an economic liberation of the African continent. Liberation. I know he's laughing. I mean, he's nodding and smiling. Maybe disagree, but very quickly, do you think so?
I do think so. And I'd like to bring the fact that trade is not in its isolation. Trade is a component in the macroeconomic engagement of our economies. So we'll have to solve some of the challenges. Like one, he's talking about the FDIs. I'm not averse to the FDIs, but I think the skepticism comes at when people see the FDIs coming into a certain country and helping to grow what you can call the capitalist, capital, because if you're building the proper economy, you have to face the productivity capacity, then increase employments and then income. Now, most of the FDIs, according to the studies, they have not been helping that in this continent. And look at many countries on this continent, you'll find that even the trade you are talking about today, 85% of the African trade is owned by only 15 countries.
I wish I would classify this as part one and then come back at a later stage with the part two.
Maybe this was
we have to take this very quickly.
Yes.
There's a question of the last question now. There's a question of the challenge. I mean, I need to raise this very quickly, a few minutes each. Do you think there are challenges, therefore, all what you've raised here, discussed here, notwithstanding, to be overcome, or more opportunities for Africa through this continental free trade area? One, we end up with the ultimate road. Very quick.
Definitely there are challenges. Let me put it this way. The African Continental Free Trade Area is a blueprint.
Yes.
It's a document which states policy, the intentions, the whatnot.
Yes.
Okay? And puts in place probably eventually an action plan.
Yes.
But policies are different from how the real economy works. If you can,
you implement that policy.
Yeah, if you cannot transform those policies into, it's not going to work. Now the challenges are with all our intentions.
Yes.
If we don't put in place the framework conditions, it's not going to work.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Very quick.
I think
one challenge. I know you have a lot.
The biggest challenge is within the individual economies.
Yeah.
We talked about consumption, for example.
Yes.
Today in Tanzania, 20% of the upper class is consuming 42% of the consumables, and only 20% of the bottom class is consuming only 7%. Now you need, I think, to correct such kind of imbalances, and that will go with the fiscal and the monetary policies. But again, we have to be clear on the ideologies of our economies. It's not about flip-flopping.
Absolutely. Thank you. One challenge, Ambassador, very quickly.
Since we're talking about a framework for transforming the trade sector in Africa, yes, the African Continental Free Trade Area is a useful initiative to coordinate the work which is being done at the regional economic communities, right? So most of the work is still going to be done there, and they should endeavor to move at a higher level of coordinating it as a customs union for Africa. Yes.
Ali, you are the last.
Yes,
the last word
the
for
biggest challenge in my view is going to be the negotiation of the CFTA. Until now, this baby has been conceived and met by politicians, midwifed by technocrats. Now we have a treaty, but when it comes to negotiating the nitty-gritty of the CFTA, we need to change the game. We need to change the people who participate. We need to bring people who are industrialists, who are traders, who are financiers, who are workers, trade unions,
Who are investors.
into the room, investors, so that they participate in these negotiations. We cannot leave this very vital task to technocrats alone.
Thank you very much. My dear panelists,
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I have overrun the time allocated for this discussion, but it is such an interesting discussion, very, very intellectual and very useful, even for the viewers when it goes on the air, but even for the policy decision makers to understand, because we know Tanzania is one of the countries which has not signed in yet, but they are consulting, they're involved in the processes all through. So all your views, the issues you have raised here, are going to be very useful, and particularly to involve the people who are going to do the actual work, the business people. But we need to do a lot of other things all together. Now, I'm sure I may have another opportunity to come to call you back. I hope you'll be available. Just as you are, we can continue with this thing and see how far we can go through. I thank you very much. I'm sorry time didn't allow. 55 minutes has gone over and above. Viewers, we must thank our panelists here. Thank you very much. That's all we have for time for you until next Monday at the same time, and on Thursday at 15 hours for the repeat program. On behalf of my very able panelists here, Dr. Kahioza, Professor Matambalya, Engineer Mufruk, Ambassador Dr. Msuya Mangachi, and my TBC crew. Thank you, viewers, and goodbye.